Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Landmark legislation codifying same-sex marriage passes the House. Now it's off to the White House, but concerns linger over religious liberty. Over 1,000 New York Times employees are on strike. The newspaper management and the union can't agree on a new contract. A Southwest Airlines flight attendant was fired 5 years ago for expressing her religious beliefs. A judge is now ordering the company to rehire her, and she'll be awarded about $1 million in damages. A new undercover report shows the dean of a school talking about questionable sex education the school offers. The school reportedly defended the dean after the report came out. And in Russia, a major break in the Brittney Griner saga as the WNBA star has been released from a penal colony. Congress has codified same-sex marriage, sending it off to the White House to become law. But concerns linger over protections for religious liberty. NTD's Melina Wisecup joins us from Capitol Hill with more.
This bill requires all 50 states to recognize same-sex marriage if it was legal in the state in which it was performed, but it does not require all states to legalize same-sex marriage. However, it does alter the federal definition of a marriage by repealing the Defense of Marriage Act, which specifically defines marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Democrats held a formal ceremony today after the passage of this bill, and it was a bipartisan bill. There were 39 House Republicans who joined with House Democrats to pass it. And on top of that, there were 12 Republicans in the Senate which approved of this measure last week. Here's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's comments on the passage of this bill earlier today.
Landmark law, changing the law for full equality. Now the federal government will never stand in the way of anyone marrying the person you love.
Now, the House did previously pass this bill, but they had to vote on it again today after the Senate made changes to it. Those changes that were made were meant to address some religious liberty issues which were raised by some Republicans. And while those changes were made to further ensure protections for religious groups, some conservative organizations are still saying it doesn't do enough. For example, a conservative legal organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom argues that it could make religious freedom and free speech cases harder to win because they say it embeds a false definition of marriage in the American legal fabric. But nonetheless, it is off to the White House now, where President Biden is expected to sign it. And in another key vote, the House today passed the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023 with overwhelming bipartisan support. It, in this bill, repeals the vaccine mandate for military members. There were about 200 Democrats who voted to pass this. Some Democrats on the floor saying that they believe the vaccine mandate served its purpose while it was there, but that it's not needed anymore. And in addition, this bill also bars U.S. manufacturers from using Chinese-made semiconductors, which is just one step closer towards pulling our critical manufacturing out of China and bringing it here back home, which is an effort that has also garnered overwhelming bipartisan support. The bill also includes around $10 billion to boost Taiwan's defense capabilities. But the catch is, Congress still needs to pass the annual government funding bill in order for the Pentagon to get the money to implement these new policies. And right now, that bill is tied up and not looking like it's going anywhere. Here's Senate Leader Chuck Schumer today on the floor speaking on the urgent need to get this done.
And we need to do whatever it takes to make that happen. We need to make sure our whole government is postured to compete with China, both at DOD and across the government. We need to fund our efforts to assist the Ukrainians. We need to fund our new communities and our friends in Taiwan.
And lawmakers still have not agreed on a top-line number for that government funding bill. And if they can't reach a deal on that, they will have to pass another short-term funding bill with less than 10 days to get this done until a government shutdown kicks in. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Hundreds of people gathered outside of the New York Times building in New York City today. Over 1,000 employees went on strike. They're asking for higher pay and better benefits. NTD's Jason Perry attended the rally and spoke to people in attendance.
We want I'm here in New York City, right outside of the New York Times building. And as you can see, hundreds of people are here in support of the New York Times employees who went on strike. The employees are asking for higher pay, better benefits, and a better work from home or work remote policy.
We are sending a clear message. They can't just give out stock dividends and buybacks like candy to shareholders and not give us a fair share.
Over 1,100 New York Times employees are on a strike that will last just 24 hours. This came after New York Times management and the union representing the employees failed to reach an agreement for a new contract.
We have fighting for the contract for 20 months now, and we are working with no contract for 20 months, and I think it's enough already.
So we have not had a contract for almost 2 years, and we did not get a raise for another year before that. This has been during high inflation. Inflation is 8, 9, 10% in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and we have not had a raise. So we are all falling behind. We're asking for a raise that makes us whole.
One New York Times employee said the company was not in trouble financially. He added that the New York Times had just spent $550 million to buy the website The Athletic. A New York Times spokesperson told the Associated Press that the company would continue producing content and it will get help from international reporters and other journalists who are not union members.
I'm not in on the union strategy, but I would look at it as sort of a shot across the bow, as they say. You know, we did it for a day, but, you know, we're ready to go out for maybe longer next time.
I think today is a really good showing of what the labor movement right now looks like. A lot of people are realizing that culture costs money, that like having the New York Times is such an incredible institution and brings a lot of empowerment to a lot of places that don't have voices. But these people are working to do that, and they need the money and the stability to do it well.
New York Times employees are ready for a new contract, and the New York Guild is the union leading this strike. They recently tweeted that the members will do whatever it takes to win a better newsroom. Jason Perry, NTD News, New York.
The flight attendant who was fired from Southwest is now reinstated with back pay. The former employee sued the airline after she was fired for expressing her religious beliefs. NTD's Arlene Richards has that story.
Former Southwest Airlines flight attendant Charlene Carter could be heading back to work after a district court judge ordered the airline to rehire her. Carter was fired for expressing her religious beliefs to union officials after they used union dues to sponsor a pro-abortion event. The union asked Southwest to fire her. A jury verdict awarded her more than $5 million. Now the judge has issued his final order.
The judge issued final judgment in the case and basically awarded Charlene Carter the maximum amount that she could be awarded under compensatory and punitive damages under the violations the judge found, or the jury found, that the union and Southwest Airlines had basically implemented or imposed on Charlene Carter.
Carter was represented by the National Right to Work Foundation. The president, Mark Mix, said the judge reduced the jury award to about $1 million. It
was a $300,000 fine, which is the max under the religious accommodation laws that exist currently. So Southwest owes her $300,000, the union owes her $300,000. There was additional money for back pay plus interest.
Mix said the flight attendant has always wanted her job back, and he doesn't think she'll have to worry about retaliation.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of Southwest employees have supported her. In fact, a former union officer was talking about the situation, saying that Southwest needs to improve their behavior in this manner, and the union does too. I think there's a whole bunch of other employees out there that would appreciate the type of protection and appreciate the courage that Charlene showed standing up for not only her rights, but for the rights of others who may be thinking the same thing.
What are you hoping that the union officials will learn from this?
I think they'll learn. I hope that they'll learn that they should focus on the workplace and stop worrying about what's happening politically in Washington, D.C. or state capitals across the country. You know, lobbying for in an event that Planned Parenthood sponsored, I don't know what that particular issue has anything to do with your service as a stewardess or a flight attendant on an airline or a pilot.
We reached out to the Workers Union and Southwest to get comment on the judge's order, but we haven't heard back from them yet. Arlene Richards, NTD News, New York.
An undercover video shows the dean of a high school talking about the school's questionable sex education. It's from investigative journalism group Project Veritas. A warning, the report contains adult content that some viewers may find distasteful.
Project Veritas released a video of Joseph Bruno, the dean of Parker High School in Chicago, talking about the school's sex education program. In one scene, Bruno describes an event he organized during Pride Month where he invited people from an LGBT center to the school.
They were passing around butt plugs and dildos to my students, talking about queer sex, using lube versus using spit.
He said the students played around with the objects, asking how they worked. When asked about the children's ages, Bruno said they're 14 to 18. The video also showed pictures of an event with a drag queen.
And we had a drag queen come in, pass out cookies and brownies and do photos.
Francis W. Parker High is an elite private school. Its website states that tuition for 1 year costs around $40,000. At one point in the video, Bruno was asked whether trustees know about the events.
You have so much freedom and so much wiggle room.
So much freedom, so much money.
I mean,
to do stuff.
Trustees are okay with that too? They don't know.
They would. It's like I wouldn't even run it by them. Like, why would I run it by them? They would be like, oh my God, that's wonderful.
Project Veritas also published an email allegedly sent out by the school after the incident, saying, "We are heartbroken to learn that one of our colleagues' words have been severely misrepresented for a malicious purpose." Project Veritas is a far-right activist group that produces deceptively edited video of secret recordings.
There's no edit. What are they talking about edit? Are they saying he didn't say these things? Then sue me. Sue me. By the way, we never lost a defamation lawsuit. That's because we don't edit anything.
NTD reached out to the school for comment, but didn't hear back before broadcast.
And earlier today, I spoke with the Epoch Times reporter Darlene McCormick Sanchez, who's been investigating what she describes as the erosion of laws and norms that's slowly making pedophilia acceptable in today's culture. Darlene McCormick Sanchez, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for having me.
Now, Darlene, you've written extensively about the erosion of traditional values. In a recent Epoch Times article, you say pedophilia is on its way to being normalized as another kind of sexual orientation. Tell me about that.
Well, what's happening is pedophilia used to be considered a heinous crime, and of course it still is to most people. But it was also designated as a mental illness. And what people are talking about now is there may be a push out there to change it from a mental illness to a sexual orientation.
In your research, you found this normalization in popular culture, in law, and in academia. What are some examples of that?
There was an ad campaign by, a fashion house out of France that had little girls in their ad holding teddy bears that were dressed in bondage. It's definitely out there in popular culture. There's also a play out there, the play Downstate. It's about pedophiles, and it paints them in a very sympathetic light, as misunderstood and mischaracterized. And, they're portrayed as someone to pity and not fear or be angry at. There is a term out there now called minor attracted person or minor attracted persons. And that came out of academia. And most of this is coming out of academia, I would have to say, and the popular culture as well. But they are saying that we should not be stigmatizing pedophiles, all pedophiles, because some of them are just attracted to minors and they aren't actually acting upon their urges. Whether or not that's true, it's hard to say because, the expert I spoke with who treats and analyzes and assesses pedophiles, he's dealt with hundreds of them. He said, they are the probably one of the best people, or the best person out there capable of, spinning a tale And so it's very difficult to understand if they're telling the truth or not.
And you say that normalizing pedophilia could ultimately lead to a major cultural change that elevates pedophilia to a protected class. What would that mean?
Well, at the very least, it would mean that they would get job protection, right? Employment protection. You can't discriminate against them because it's a sexual orientation. So you can imagine if a pedophile wants to go work at a daycare center. And you couldn't do anything about that. And, obviously the next step would be to work on weakening the laws or eliminating some of the laws on pedophilia.
We recently saw California reportedly releasing pedophiles, among other inmates, from prison early. Do you think we're moving towards decriminalizing pedophilia altogether?
I don't see it being totally wiped off the books. I think that you would have a huge public outcry over that. But I see this happening in stages and little by little, like an erosion, of our laws and our norms. And, things that were unacceptable in the past, slowly become acceptable in culture. And I think that's what the danger is.
And you mentioned that you spoke with a sex offender treatment specialist who's concerned that the general public isn't aware of this push to normalize pedophilia. What do you think can be done to increase awareness?
Well, I think, people need to pay attention when they start seeing advertising and, things in popular culture, books, magazines that start referring to people, pedophiles, as minor attracted persons, because that's where, the cultural push is coming from. You can also, look up pedophilia laws in your own state and see what they're about. People are on the internet all the time looking for stuff. If you look that up, you could probably get an idea as to what's happening in your state. And I would urge everybody, if you see that there's changes coming to your laws, contact your state representatives. I mean, you have to make sure that those laws are in place and they stay in place.
Absolutely. Darlene McCormick Sanchez, Epoch Times journalist, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And now over to sports news. Here's NTD's Dave Martin with today's top stories.
Thank you, Steph. Brittney Griner is finally coming home. The WNBA star was released Thursday by Russia in a prisoner swap for notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout.
Brittney will soon be back in the arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along.
Griner, who normally plays basketball in the off-season in Russia, was arrested at a Moscow airport back on February 17 on drug possession charges for reportedly bringing less than a gram of cannabis oil into the country. She eventually pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 9 years in a Russian penal colony where she was recently transferred to. The swap, though, came at a heavy price, as Bout, who was nicknamed the Merchant of Death, was arrested in 2010 and was serving a 25-year sentence on charges that he sold tens of millions of dollars worth of weapons to be used against Americans. Now, unfortunately, the arrangement does not include the release of former Marine Paul Whelan, who, like Griner, had been declared wrongfully detained by the U.S. State Department. Whelan was convicted in 2020 on what the U.S. has called sham espionage charges and was sentenced to 16 years in a penal colony. And for your sports viewing schedule tonight, the NBA has a triple header planned featuring two-time reigning MVP Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets playing at the Portland Trail Blazers. And in the NHL, 5 games are on tap for tonight, including the Dallas Stars and winger Jason Robertson, who's second in the league with 23 goals, taking on the Ottawa Senators. And finally, for you football fans, the defending Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams host the Las Vegas Raiders on Thursday Night Football. And that's a wrap for sports. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Dave. And if you have any news tips or feedback for the show, you can email us at eveningnews@ntd.com. And coming up, a protester put to death in Iran. The Islamic regime could be on track to execute more people in connection with the ongoing nationwide protests. And an activist holds a 7-day hunger strike at Apple's headquarters in Silicon Valley. He says the latest software update censors its users. That and more on NTD News.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Navigating a world of economic madness, you need to have the right guide. What do today's decisions mean for your tomorrow? We ask why. What's the alternative? Uncover the deeper reasons and the hidden influences, and highlight the real opportunities for profit. At NTD Business, we connect the dots for you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. NTD Business. I'm Paul
Whelan. The Iranian regime is beginning to impose the death penalty on people arrested in connection with the ongoing nationwide protests. The regime carried out the first such execution today.
Iranian authorities on Thursday carried out the first execution of a prisoner arrested for alleged crimes during the protests. This means that more protesters could be put to death in the near future. The executed man was identified as Mohsen Shikari. Authorities accuse him of blocking a street and attacking a security force member with a machete in Tehran. Iranian media reported that Shikari was arrested September 25th, then convicted on November 20th on the charge of moharabe. It's a term in Sharia law used to describe a major crime committed against Islam. That charge has been levied against others in the decades since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It carries the death penalty. Iran is one of the world's top executioners. It typically executes prisoners by hanging. Activists estimate that at least a dozen people so far have received death sentences over their involvement in the protests. The protests that began in mid-September have become the most significant opposition to the Iranian regime since 1979. Student protests continued on Wednesday on multiple college campuses across the country. Wednesday marked Students' Day in Iran, and protests also took place at the University of Tehran as the Iranian president visited. So far, an estimated 475 people have been killed, and authorities have detained over 18,000 during the protests. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
And staying with the Middle East, China appears to be developing closer ties with the region. Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping signed a series of new deals today during his visit to Saudi Arabia. Xi signed a, quote, comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with the King of Saudi Arabia. It covers 34 investment deals, including one with Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Huawei is expected to develop cloud computing and build high-tech complexes in Saudi cities. Xi called the deal a new era in China's ties with the Arab world. The Saudi nation gave Xi a lavish welcome at the King's Palace. In comparison, the reception of President Biden in July was much more subdued. Ties between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have been strained by the kingdom's energy policy and human rights issues. And a Chinese activist has set up camp and started a hunger strike near Apple's headquarters. This in response to Apple's recent airdrop restrictions in the Chinese market, which will reportedly expand to global markets. The activist tells NTD's David Lamb what compelled him to do it.
A Chinese activist started a hunger strike near Apple's headquarters in Cupertino on Monday. This comes in response to Apple changing its airdrop restrictions in China.
The direct reason for my hunger strike is because Tim Cook just stops and restricts airdrop functions in China, and there is no response to the media and the public. So I think we need a response from Tim Cook and Apple. Yes.
Axios reported that a November 9th Apple update restricted sharing features in the Chinese market. After a 10-minute limit when sharing files and photos to the Everyone setting, devices will then switch to share with contacts only. Wang says this limits the Chinese people's ability to communicate safely.
In China, the people only are allowed to use airdrop for 10 minutes. It's ridiculous. And it's only happened after 1 week of the A4 revolutions. I don't think it's a coincidence.
On Wednesday, TechCrunch and Mac Rumors reported that Apple expanded the airdrop restriction to the iOS 16.2 beta. Apple says the feature is an effort to cut down on spam sent in crowded areas like malls, and originally planned to roll out the feature globally starting in 2023. NTD reached out to Apple for comment but did not hear back by airtime. Wang says the new restrictions will suppress information about the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's, hard COVID restrictions, lockdowns, and other human rights violations.
They cannot go out of their own house, and all of their behavior are controlled by the government because they have the QR code, which is to monitor their behavior, to monitor their step every day. So, yes.
This sparked the many A4 or white paper protests throughout the world, calling an end to the CCP's tyrannical rule.
Right now, if we don't pay attention to it, they will just expand and expand. And one day, the human rights in the United States will be affected, yes.
More demonstrations are expected to be held in solidarity throughout the world. Now, Wang has been here for 3 days, and he's planning to stay for a total of 7 days for this hunger strike. And he's hoping for more people to join him on Saturday, December 10th, for the Human Rights Day. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. Good night.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Did you know YouTube only keeps selected videos on its platform? So if you want to make sure you get the full picture, just subscribe to our newsletter. Go to newsletter.ntd.com and sign up. It's free.